Welcome to Share a Pint, where we tap into the craft beer scene. I'm Jerry Hulla, your host. Today I'm joined by a close friend and longtime supporter of the show, Rob Lutz. Thanks for being on the show, Rob.
Thanks, Jerry. Glad to be here.
We're going to be doing things a little differently this episode since we're celebrating the first anniversary of the show. Our first episode aired on November 29th of 2019, which happened to be Black Friday, just like today. When I began thinking of ways to celebrate the first season of Share a Pint, I talked with some people about different approaches, formats, things like that. And then you floated an idea past me. So, Rob, why don't I let you take it from here and you can share what we're going to do today.
Sounds good. Thanks. So I feel like you do such a great job of finding places and interesting people and cool stories and all these locations. But one of the things I think is missing from your show, and you and I have had this conversation in the past, and I think would just kind of enhance it, is if people got to know a little bit more about you personally. Like, who's the guy doing the interviews? Who is this guy that's like going to all these cool breweries and meaderies and cideries and asking all these great questions? And why would I want to share a pint with you? I mean, I know because I've known you for, well, we won't even get into how long that is, but but you know what I mean? But it's mm-hmm. Let's get to know you and let's add that to this because I think that'd be really cool. So with that being said, let me ask you my first question, Jerry.
Okay.
When did you go from being, hey, I like beer, to, I'd like to try as many different kinds as I can and expand my palate?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's like anything else with craft beer. It kind of develops over time, enjoying craft beer. And then I think a lot of craft beer is about the experience and who you're hanging out with and conversations and everything like that. So I think as I got into that more, I was hanging out with people that I was really enjoying sharing a pint with, and it just kind of grew from there. I'm going to throw a little bit of the blame on my good buddy Mike Hall in Minnesota when I was living out there in Bemidji, and great brewery there, the Bemidji Brewing. We got to figure out how to get them on the show. They're really cool. But we were sharing pint there, and we've been there a few times because my previous life, as you know, viewers maybe don't, was in athletics. So, coached collegiate volleyball for a long time, and he was the athletic trainer for us. And so, many chances to share pints. And he was like, hey, have you heard of this app called Untapped? And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he's like, oh, it's really cool. You can, check in beers and basically just kind of log beers and, know what you've had and what you're interested in, helps you find stuff in the area and all. And I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. So we're literally sitting at the Bemidji Brewing, having a pint, and I download it. And Adam is my first friend, and we check in some beers. And that kind of started a bit of a snowball effect of now if I'm hanging with the right people, and let's say I hang out with my buddy Joe and Joe Morris here in Maryland, he likes Saisons and some things like that. So I might try Saisons, although they're not necessarily my favorite style. I've come to like them a little bit more because I'm hanging out with him and he likes them. Or we're in Bemidji and it's really, really cold at -30 degrees, which I don't know if you know anything about cold in Alaska.
Nah, I wouldn't know a thing about it, my friend.
Yeah. So, I wasn't a big stout and porter guy. And then I learned to appreciate that because of the weather and everything else when I was up in Bemidji. But the funny thing was I didn't really learn to appreciate it as much as I did until I moved again down to South Texas, Laredo on the border, and had the opposite. 100-degree temperatures all the time where it's like, who wants to drink a stout when it's 100 degrees? And I was like, I think I want to go inside, turn on my AC and drink a stout. So, yeah. Well, my tastes have kind of changed on those types of things. So.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because my very next question was, so who are some of the people that's influenced you? So you've already talked about a few. And to be fair, you've influenced me in my beer drinking. You got me turned on to Untapped. I don't have nearly the many check-ins that you do, but you've got me to try a bunch of different styles too, which is what I think one of the great things about Untapped is that it becomes a competition almost in a game within yourself of like, oh, I've never had that one. Let's try that versus, oh, I know I like that one already. Mm-hmm. You can always go with the one you like. And it depends on the situation, right? But there's times when you want to explore a little bit. And I think Untapped kind of helps you to do that. And so thanks for turning me on to that one.
Yep. I got you into IPAs.
To be fair, though, I actually really, truly am starting to like them. It was kind of like my red wine progression.
Yeah.
You start with some very, very faint red wine and you work your way up to some bold, heavy stuff. And IPAs are kind of the same way, right? Like,
Right.
my particular palate was if you were above 20 IBU, I was not my thing. And now I'm all the way up to like 55 or 60. So, I'm
There you
getting
go.
there.
And I think that and that IBU thing is such a measurement that I'm like, I don't even know why. I mean, in fact, a lot of breweries now, you can see it on Untappd. They don't even put that in there. It's listed as NA because I mean, I've had beers that are 120 IBU, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a bitter, nasty, and I don't get that. And then I've had some that are like 20 or 25, and I'm like, oh, what the? It's a hot burn. What the?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not really sure how much IBU is really as prevalent as a measurement these days. So
It is true. I have noticed that started to change just because it says a high number on it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's got that traditional bitterness with it. Again, it's part of the reasons I watch your podcast, right? Is
mhm.
is to learn about these things and hear how the breweries do what they do so that I can look at a can and read the label or a bottle and read the label and go, oh, well, yeah, I'll try this one. I wouldn't normally, or maybe it's out of my comfort zone or whatever. But hey, I heard that if it's done with this kind of hops, it's not as, outside my flavor profile. Give it a shot.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, that's all it is about sharing the love of craft beer and trying to expand people's palates. And I'm trying to constantly do that myself.
So do you find yourself now, in your beer quest becoming more seasonal as a drinker? Do you change the types of beers you drink due to what's around you?
Um, that's a great question. I don't. It depends on the season. I was going to say I don't really think so, but it does depend on the season. Because obviously in the fall you've got some great Marsons and Oktoberfests and things like that. I'm a big pumpkin beer fan. I don't think that's a secret, maybe for some of our viewers, but I really enjoy them. And the weird thing about that is I don't eat pumpkin anything else. I don't eat pumpkin pie. I don't like sweet potatoes. I don't like anything else pumpkin is not my thing. But pumpkin beers I pretty much enjoy, and started having problems the last 5 7 years finding them when I wanted to drink them, which was in the fall, September, October, November, and they were out in August, and then they're gone before you hit the month you want to drink them. Which is weird because I haven't found that with other seasonal beers. Like you don't find your summery, lighter gozes or shandies or things like that, spring, early summer. You don't see them coming out, in February and being gone before you want to drink them. It's just something a little bit weird with the pumpkins and the Martins and things. And I've asked some brewers about it, and the short of it for craft brewers is uh, Sam Adams. Sam Adams started putting their stuff out earlier and has a huge share in the market. And they were like, if we don't get our seasonals out to compete and put them on the shelf, then nobody's gonna buy them and nobody's gonna drink them. So we have to put them out early too. We don't want to, have pumpkin beers gone before Halloween, let alone Thanksgiving. But that's happened a lot. So now, I've grown in my taste to go just cellar that stuff. Buy it in August and put it in the cellar and wait till you want to drink it in November or whatever. So
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Like, so from listening to a couple of your podcasts, I was thinking your answer was going to be, well, as a brewer, you have to think about the flavor you want to make and get the fruit or whatever it is you want while it's ripe.
yeah.
And so I thought you were going to tell me, well, I can't get those ingredients any other time of year, so therefore I can't make my brew. And then now you're telling me it's just a competition with Sam Adams thing.
Well, there's a big part of that. And then the other thing is that, there's a lot of ways to store that fruit. You can freeze that fruit. You can ferment that fruit. When we talked with Sarah and Tom at Milk House in one of our earlier episodes, they've got great stuff because they're a farm brewery. They're growing most of their own ingredients. They're using pretty much all Maryland ingredients in their beers. So they said, hey, we know when we're going to get our peaches or our plums, and then we just put them in barrels and let them ferment, and then we have them when we need them. You use what you can, and you have some when you need it. You talk with Rob at Checkerspot, and they just have a huge freezer space. He's like, we get the fresh fruit and we freeze it, and then we use it when we need to use it. So I think everybody's a little bit different, but I think there's ways to work around the seasonality of the fruits and the other ingredients that you want to use.
Makes sense. Anybody else that you've had episodes with in the past doing any particular, fresh ingredients or seasonal stuff like that?
What I think is great is that here in Maryland, there's just a lot of farm breweries. And then even not just breweries, but other things like cider. Like we talked to Distillery Lane Ciderworks, and they're on a farm, and they have 18 different kinds of varieties of apples in these orchards, and 4,000 plus some trees. And not all of those are apples for cider. A lot of them are for cooking and baking, and they send it out in a lot of different markets in a lot of different ways, but they are still essentially a farm brewery that has most of their, well, really all the ingredients they need with cider right there. Keith at Wardaka, Corey at Manor Hill, again, a couple more farm breweries in Maryland that are using a lot of their own ingredients, or getting it sourced from other local places in Maryland. And that's one of the things I found that's really cool about Maryland is they really try to use a lot of local ingredients, and brewers support each other and support the agriculture here. It was a big thing when we talked with Jim at the Brewers Association of Maryland, just how much people really use local ingredients for beers here in Maryland and still make really great stuff that you think you might have to outsource and get from somewhere else.
That's really cool. The fact that everything can be done locally. One of the things that I find unfortunate about your podcast is you talk about all these great places, and I hear all these cool stories, and there's people I would love to absolutely support. And then until recently, I was in Canada, so we had an international shipping issue there.
Yeah.
And then now I'm further away in Anchorage, Alaska. So I'm in the States. I just can't necessarily get access to that stuff. So I think it's cool too that you're inspired to go to what you have locally and what you have regionally and all those kinds of things, right? I think that's a great message. I think you give up constantly.
Oh, appreciate that.
Yeah. So, as I just discussed, I've bounced around a few times. Just recently, you've bounced around a few times back in our old life when we were college volleyball people. I have a hard time even remembering that sometimes.
Yeah.
So, all right, man, I gotta ask, what inspired you to start a podcast?
I've thought about this. You're not the first person to ask. You just get to be the first one on the air. But I started really because I was thinking about this, and then I thought about, kind of how the name came about and how the first episodes and things came about. And then I was like, yeah, but that doesn't really answer the podcast part of it. And I'm like, where did that really kind of come from? And I think a lot of, again, my evolution in craft beer and learning more about craft beer and starting to homebrew, which I did when I was back in Texas for a while, because that's close to the Mexican border. You're pretty limited in what you could get, and you really couldn't get a lot of craft beer. There are too many different laws that every county in Texas was different, and you couldn't get something shipped across a county line that you could go to, let's say your Total Wine and More, to get something, but you drive up to San Antonio and they don't have it, but Austin does. But Austin can't send it down the road to San Antonio because of these laws. And I was like, so I'm having trouble getting craft beer. So I got into homebrewing and did some of that, and was really listening to the original podcast that Untapped did, called Drinking Socially. And they got two different guys doing it now, but a couple of years ago when it started, it was Kyle Roderick and Tim Mather. And Tim Mather is one of the co-founders of Untapped. Just celebrated their 10th anniversary, last month. So they've been around for a while. But Tim's moved on to other things. But he and Kyle did a podcast that was just really enjoyable. There were segments where they would talk about some things that were happening in the news with beer, different beer articles, like stuff from all around the world that they found out about. They always did a style of the week, and they would talk about that particular style and give you the history and why it was what it was and how it came about. And so really listening to them and how personable they were, that's kind of really what made me, I learn more about craft beer. That's a really cool style. I've got to go seek that out and try that style now that I know the story behind it. Or they've given a couple beer recommendations. Maybe I can find those. So I was really listening to those bi-weekly podcasts and becoming friends with those guys. Actually had an episode where I contributed a fair amount to it. I sent them a bottle of something from Adroit Theory. One of our past guests they have their own unique stories that are pretty cool. Love marking them down there. But I sent them something, and they tried it on the show, and they had it, and they talked about it, and a few other things. So we kind of got to know each other. And I think that's where I started thinking podcasts. I was developing this love of craft beer. I was trying different styles. I was starting to homebrew. I'm listening to John Holzer and the Four Brewers podcast crew to learn more about homebrewing. And that's when I started thinking, hey, there's got to be a lot of really unique, interesting stories that people don't know about from the brewery, that you don't go to a website and see this story or hear this. And I think people would really enjoy it because even if they don't like craft beer, people love a good story. Um, so that's kind of where I think it became an idea of a podcast. And, I've got a little bit of a technical background. And so I guess it kind of started to bubble and surface a little bit more. And I was like, I think I should look into doing this.
That's awesome, man. It's funny. As long as I've known you, I've never actually known the answer to that question. You've been doing this a year, and somehow I've never asked that question. I'm glad I finally did, and I think now that your viewers and listeners are probably glad I did too.
Yeah.
So okay. So then, how did you decide on your content for the story? And probably even a bigger question, because I'm going to throw two at you at once here. Is there a story behind the name Share a Pint?
There is, and it's again. I'm going to go back to my buddy Mike Hall in Minnesota. He and I still stay in touch a lot, and we send each other some beers as I miss some of the great breweries that are out there in Minnesota. But it was I had, as you know, I had decided to make a career change and stepped away from coaching, and I came back home here to Maryland. And so while I was back here and thinking about what the next step was, and thinking about doing something in craft beer. And had this podcast thing kind of in my mind. I'd been talking with Mike about it, and I think it was like mid-October, late one night, we're trading text messages. And I'm like, I can go with this thing if I've got a name. And the name has been killing me. I'm like, I just can't think of something that works and fits. And, so he's throwing ideas back. I mean, he talked about, I think some of the early things he had mentioned was brewed and reviewed. And I said, hey, yeah, but I don't want to do a beer review podcast. I said, that was one of the things, because I did get a lot of good advice from Tim Mather from that podcast that they'd done with Untapped. And like I said, he and I became friends. And he gave me some really good advice to help me down the podcast route. And he said, look, if there's one thing I recommend, one thing, don't be another guy drinking beer podcast. He said, there's too many of those. He goes, and there are plenty that do a good job. He goes, but who needs that? It's subjective. Everyone's tastes are subjective. And I knew that from just being, in the cigar industry for a little while and selling that it's really hard to tell somebody what they should smoke, what they might like as a cigar, because those tastes and flavor profiles are all very specific to individual tastes, as you know. So I was like, okay, no, I don't want to do that. I said, I know what I want. I want to tell unique and interesting stories. I want to give people platforms to share this. I think that, and he's like, that is a great idea. He's like, you got to run with that. So I go back to Mike and I'm, playing with ideas. Like, that's why I don't want to go brew and review. And and he goes, well, what about Beneath the Foam? And I was like, that's not bad. I said, here's the thing. I don't have a name, but I've got a segment that I'm thinking like every episode, maybe we do like a social media segment. Something's going to help drive traffic. I said, so we'll do a hashtag. I said, and so my thought was, we'll do a hashtag every week. That's, share a pint with, who would you share a pint with? What would it be a pint of? Things like that. So I was like, I was thinking about that. And we're going back and forth. He goes, Share a Pint with his pretty good name. He goes, you might want to go with that. So we bantered about, do you leave the with on? Do you take the with off? What gives you more freedom and flexibility? And so we discussed it. And as we talked more, I was like, yeah, Share a Pint. Share a Pint. That sounds great. We're going to go with that. So that's how it became Share a Pint.
That's awesome, man. That's yeah, I think we need to get that hashtag rolling if we haven't already got it going more. So I think we should probably do that more. So let's encourage those folks out there to share some pints. Speaking of which, by the way, I still haven't got my first cheers of the day cross time zones here.
Yes,
it's a little early for me, but I'm doing this for you, buddy. Doing it for you.
Yeah, you're starting day drinking early. So.
Well, I can't say I'm really complaining about that either. I'll be honest.
Yeah. We're all quarantined. So what are you going to do?
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Just make sure I hit the treadmill later, right? Nice. So, so you got the name, and as you said, once you had the name, you knew you could get rolling with it. So, what were some of your original goals with the show?
Well, like I said, I wanted an opportunity for brewers and people in the craft beer industry. Maybe you do can or bottle art. Maybe you're distributing, marketing. You're connected to the craft beer industry in some regards. You've got to have a great, interesting story. So I felt like, if you do this right, you probably never run out of interesting stories to share. So that's what I was thinking. And then where it kind of really took off was, so I had that conversation with Mike in mid October, and then I go to the Baltimore Craft Beer Festival, the beginning of November last year, 2019. And unfortunately, with everything going on with COVID, no festivals like that anymore. So I go to that festival, and in my head, I've like, now I've got a name, now I've got what it's going to be about. Now I'm going to drink great craft beer, make a lot of contacts, talk to people, and set this up, get this rolling. So I talked with Ben Hunter at Denison's, second guest on our show back in December 2019, and I'm drinking their Papagayo, which was just a great saison, which has some really nice fruit notes to it, and it was good. I was like, right away, I'm thinking of Joe, and I'm like, Joe's gotta love this beer. And so I told Ben, I said, I'm Jerry Hulla. I'm going to be the host of this. It's called Share a Pint. This is what we want to do. And he was so enthusiastic. Ben was just like, that's an awesome idea. And he's like, and I'll support you. And I got people I can connect you with and people that can tell you stories, and I'll be on the show. He's like, this is great. And he was so enthusiastic and supportive. It like really, really pumped me up. So by the time the conversation with him was done, I was fired up, and I was like, yeah, we're going to do this. So I went around the rest of the day, going, hi, I'm Jerry, I'm from Share Pint, we're going to do this, blah, blah, blah. And making friends with people like Keith at Wardaka, and then Chris and Carrie Keene at Berry Cask and Kettle. And that was even just a brewery in planning at that point. They were only just putting out some of their product to say, hey, we're going to be a brewery eventually. And, we talked to them a couple months back, and they're still in the process because of everything with COVID of getting it up and going, but them and Jake at Smoketown, who ended up being our first guest, I just made a lot of contacts there because each time I talked to somebody, they had a similar, very positive response. And they were like, yeah, we'd totally do that. So I walked out of that weekend having a lot of confidence, really thinking this could go, and having a bunch of people lined up. Went from that November 2nd. And then first episode was shot at Smoketown on the 20th of November, and then released the 29th on Black Friday. So in that short time, it just snowballed. And then it became what it is now. It's in its bi-weekly format. At one point, despite the holiday season, which worried me, releasing it when I did, I was like, oh, we're going to get rolling, and then nobody's going to be available because of the holiday season. Everybody's going to be closed. I was able to shoot, 3 episodes in less than 2 weeks before the second episode was even released. And so I had a buffer to get through the slower holiday times, and people going, yeah, just hit me back after the first of the year, hit me back then. And so never really had a problem when we were going into breweries and shooting of having people that were interested and setting those things up. Unlike when we all got locked in for COVID, that's a different story. But the initial start, everybody was fired up and into it. So it's been a blessing.
That's cool, man. It sounds to me like you've got your own version of you got the episodes in the freezer to time release them when you need them, right? That's a good call. Yeah. That's you committed to bi-weekly, which is that's a challenge. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen from year to year. Obviously, 2020 and the last part of 2019 there were, well, a challenge. But to be able to commit to that and to be able to do that and continually produce it. I know I've taken a few frantic phone calls from you over the time of like, what do I do? And hey, can you check this content? And does the audio come in clearly? And, and all that kind of stuff. And you've done it, man, which is pretty cool. Which leads me right into, so far, what do you think has been your biggest challenge to date, and how'd you get through it?
Well, it's funny because I, as you know, asked a similar question to all of our guests, and I think it kind of changes. When I first started, one of the other things that helped me with the first 11 episodes that were actually able to be filmed in breweries, is going to the site and taking care of everything. I had another good friend, a longtime childhood friend, Sean Davis, who was more into the that side of things with television production, TV, that kind of thing. We were kids. We used to do stop motion animation clay movies on Super 8 and crazy little stuff like that. Met in like middle school doing that at a summer camp. And so he's still been connected with that kind of industry. And so he's like, hey, have you heard of the Community Media Center? Like there are, various places throughout the states. Yours, obviously, you got one right there in Carroll County. Yeah, he goes, you should become a member, because then you can get access to their equipment. and, cameras and microphones and lighting and editing and everything you need. He's like, they've got like an ESPN type of studio. They've got amazing equipment for the nominal fee of what's ended up being $40 to be a member for a year. It was a no-brainer. So I got involved with that, and Mike Fell is a membership coordinator there and been an amazing amount of help for things. And so yeah, I go to the breweries, and I got two cameras because I got two angles, and I got two sets of lights and wireless microphones. And I walk in there like 3 or 4 trips from the car looking like a pack mule, one-man band, setting everything up, getting everything ready to go. Is the sound right? Is the lighting right? Are the angles right? And then switch gears, become the host, and sit down and interview the guest. And then when I'm done, shoot a whole bunch of B-roll, which for people that aren't familiar, that's the additional footage that shows up when you're talking, and people would cut to this, and we get to see some things that people are talking about, and I think it just visually adds to the episode and to what people are saying. But I shoot all of that myself as well, and then I go back and edit it all together. And so that had, every time was a different challenge. Like every shoot, I'd come back and I was like, oh, I learned to do this, or oh, I didn't forget to check that this time. I white balanced, or I checked this, and Mike's like, oh, that's really good. You should look for this, look for that. And so that was every time there was something. I really think that literally anything that could have happened did happen. And it was always new. And I always felt like I learned something and I was ready to be better the next time. And then something new would happen. So it really probably wasn't until probably our 7th episode with Rob at Checkerspot that like I came out of that thing and I go, all right, I nailed it. I go, the angles were right, the balance was right, the color adjustments, the sound was on point, we were good, I'm like, I've got this, and it was good. And then I'd go to the next episode and something crazy would happen, and I was like, what the, what? So they were constantly changing. All the challenges were constantly changing. It was constantly a pivot for, I'd say, the last several months of basically during this pandemic. The biggest challenge has been going virtual, and how do you do this remotely as opposed to being in a brewery. It's sometimes harder to get people lined up and interested to do this while we're remote than it was when we were doing it in person, which kind of didn't really make sense to me. I was like, wait, why is it harder to get guests now when you're basically, hey, give me 30 minutes in front of your computer and we're good. And again, Mike is a great mentor there at the media center, and said, hey, you had an appointment with these people. You were physically going to show up in person somewhere. They had to be available for you. You were on their calendar. He goes, as busy as they are with everything you say, he goes, it's easy to forget or slip through the cracks if it's something virtual. He goes, it's not the same type of meeting to keep. He's like, so, don't worry about it. Keep plugging away. But as you said, you've gotten some frantic phone calls and messages where I'm like, all right, I had 4 potential guests and they all canceled at the last minute, and I'm scrambling, and what am I going to do? And, the Lord has always worked it out, and something has always fallen into place. And sometimes some of my better episodes, as far as how entertaining the guests were or the things they shared with us, has come from more of a last minute type of thing. Hey, I'm filling in because I know you're in a pinch. We were going to do this eventually, but I got you. I'll pull you out of the fire there. And there've been some episodes like that have been awesome. I mean, I appreciate Jake at DC Beer doing that for me one week from vacation on the Eastern Shore with his family, shutting himself in a room for about 30 minutes and talking with us. Kendrick at Maryland Craft Beer, and that did the same type of thing. Kind of came through when I had some people fall through, and we had a great conversation. And he talked about his road trip across country and all these different breweries that he'd hit in the Midwest, and what the COVID situations were like in those states and how they were pivoting. So he had a lot of great stuff to say. So it's all worked out.
Well, that's a great thing, right? And it's funny, when we were back in our past lives, we would tell ourselves we had to tell our athletes at least 7 times the exact same thing before they got it. So as soon as you said it was your 7th one, you felt like you nailed. I'm like, I feel like I've heard that somewhere before.
Funny how those past lives overlap.
Yeah. And of course, as soon as the next curveball comes, you're like, well, you didn't tell me that part, coach.
Right.
Well, yeah, we got to do that 7 times too. Okay, hang on. Right on. Is this really episode number 27, Jerry? Like, seriously?
Yeah.
Wow.
A full year, 26 bi-weekly. So that's why, 2 weeks ago and released the Clear Skies episode, to learn about mead with Yancy Bodenstein. That was a great episode. He was an awesome guest. So that was episode number 26 on a bi-weekly basis. We're like, hey, I'm like, that's season one. I'm like,
Yeah.
we're done a season. And then I started thinking, I was like, we should probably have some sort of special or celebration or anniversary. I'm like, we should do something on the actual date of today, the 27th of November, another Black Friday, going, all right, season one.
Exactly. You find everything you can to celebrate, particularly right about now, right? So you've had just fantastic episodes, and I've truly enjoyed learning. Again, not even in the same region. I had very little hope to go see any of these people when I was living even on that side of the country, right? Now I know some places to go when I get back to Maryland. Some places in Pennsylvania, all sorts of cool stuff. I've got some fun stories. If I'm ever in a place that's got any of the beers I've now seen, if I ever find a Checkerspot or Smoketown, I'm like, hey, I need to get one of those. Like, I've heard about this. I want to do that, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the cool things that inspired you to pick some of the people and places that you did the episodes with? Beyond meeting them at the show.
I think that's kind of what helped, is that everybody in the craft beer industry knows everybody else. It's a small community, much as we're familiar with from coaching, and everybody's very supportive of everybody else. So, you talk with somebody and they say, hey, who has a great story, or hey, who's pretty cool and you should talk to is this person or that person. And so that's kind of really been a big part of it too. I went through my list of places that I visited and enjoyed the beers from the craft beer festival and said, hey, who did I not get a chance to talk to? So I had a couple people from that list on top of the, half dozen or so that I walked out with contacts for. And then people saying, hey, you need to talk to this person, you talk to that person. And like I said, being so connected, like in our former life of coaching, there's always like one or two people that like literally know everyone. And then they're like, well, just what are you looking for? I'll point you in that direction, or I did an episode with you and now I'll talk with them. And Ty at Asteria is definitely like that. Ty's on that short list where he's a fun guy. I mean, if you look at how they do their social media, he's hilarious. And our first time we sat down with him, that was our longest episode. It was nearly an hour, and it was the first time it'd gone like that. And I'm editing it. I'm thinking, wow, we've been like 30, 35 minutes or so for the first several episodes, and he was episode 8. And I was like, there's nothing you can cut out. I mean, people who know Ty and listen to Ty, they're like, dude, I want to drink beer with that guy. And so I enjoyed drinking beers with him and just listening to his stories. And I was like, screw it. It's just going to be what it is. It's that long. And if people want to listen to it, they're going to really enjoy it. And if they don't, they're going to miss out on some great stuff. So,
no, very true. Absolutely. No, again, like there's sometimes that I look at it, and one of the great things about being on a podcast, right, is you can always hit the pause button, or if you're listening in your car and oh, hey, I got to where I'm going, well, stop, and you come right back in, and maybe you rewind if you forgot something, or you just pick up where you left off. It's really cool, and that's one of the nice things about the medium that way, is that you can do that with podcasts, right? And of course, the other side of this is you have a webcast with it as well, so you can actually see visually, and you can get, hey, what is the picture that they're describing behind me, and Smoketown says that this was a firehouse, so what am I looking at? I want to see what that building looks like, and does it match the description that you've described in my head? And now here's the footage, and thanks for describing a B-roll. I never knew what that was. I've always been curious what that was, and now it makes perfect sense.
Cool.
And how important those are to segments, right?
Right.
So that leads me to kind of the behind the scenes stuff, right? So what kind of things are going on behind the scenes that, of course, you're willing to share, or you'd want people to know because you think they're interesting? Are any cool stories in there?
Well, like I kind of touched on, I kind of bounce back and forth sometimes when I'm having conversations or correspondence with people. Is it me and I, or is it we and us? And I originally thought, you open the door to this being something that gains some momentum and gains a lot of interest, and then you can bring some other people on board to help you out. And then maybe you don't have to be the pack mule monkey bringing in all the equipment and setting everything up. Maybe you can literally just be the host, or as they say, the talent, which is funny, but okay, I'll go with it. I'll be talent and just roll in and ask the questions and drink the beer. And that's the cool part. I got people setting up, breaking down, shooting B-roll, doing whatever. Maybe people editing. So I think maybe early on, with the possibility that something like that could happen, especially with the community media center's support and people that could potentially be willing to come out and going to gain some experience of their own by helping other people out. They do a great job of helping, each other out with their projects. So I was like, okay. So it was a lot of, we and us. And then I got to a point where I was like, I'm wondering whether it'd be good for people to know that this is like a one-man band, and maybe they appreciate a little more what's going on because of the effort of going, that dude's doing everything. What the heck? So I think that's a little bit of behind the curtain, if people don't realize that it's literally everything that's going on, from the finding of the guests and scheduling everything and putting together the research for the questions and what we're going to talk about, and going to the sites and doing all the setup and testing and breaking down and interviewing, and then coming back and doing all the editing, which takes a ridiculous amount of time if you're, well, from up in our past lives, the perfectionist that I am from coaching. So editing it to the nth degree to just, it's just right. Is that okay? And then trying to promote it and get it up, and handling all the social media and just some things like that. So yeah, that's probably the biggest peel back of the curtain, is that this guy doing everything.
It's a lot of work, man. It really is.
Well, it's a labor
I
of
will
love.
say this.
Yeah.
You do give credit, I've noticed it a few times, to someone else helping you. Who is that other person?
Probably a lot of times it's in reference to reviewing what my work is before it gets published, and that's Mike Fell at the Community Media Center. He's the membership director there, and he's been fantastic. I mean, he's stayed late hours with me when I'm there to edit. I mean, when pre-COVID, when I'm in there in the lab editing, there were days that I was there from the open to the close of that place, and day after day after day. I mean, after a few months, all the staff knew me by name, and they felt like I was part of the staff. They're like, oh, yeah, we have a staff meeting. Oh, Jerry, you don't have to go to that. You're not staff. We're sorry. You're just always here. So Mike has been fantastic. I mean, he's got so much experience in that side of the industry of television production, or anything like that. He can say, hey, that's pretty good, or you might want to color balance this and look for that, or here's where you want to adjust maybe some audio, or here's what you want to look for. And I've really, really appreciated that. So if people watch long enough or listen long enough, at the end, when I go through the credits, I give him credit every episode at the end. And when I can, and it fits into the episode, which he hates, but I'm like, dude, couldn't do it without you. So
yeah, you got to thank those people that help, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Speaking of help, that kind of leads me to the next question here is, where have you gotten your support from, and what's kept you going for an entire year, particularly the year we call 2020?
It's a great question, because there have been times when I've asked myself that, and there have been times where I kind of feel like the answer has changed. I mean, the whole reason we're doing this is because you and I are good friends, and you've been a great supporter of the show. And I've already mentioned Mike Hall out in Minnesota, and Scott Scafari down in Georgia, who we both know, and a lot of people we have in common. Eduardo Filos out in Colorado, Rich Lewinsky, that's up in New York. Just people that have been connected to us, again, most of them through coaching, who have kind of come on this journey with me and said, hey, I'm interested, I'll support, I'll share. I mean, that's the big part. People that are interested enough to listen. I can't forget. I've mentioned Joe Morris, who's, again, another dear friend, another brother like you. And then Brian Cargus has been a really big supporter down in Virginia. And Brian's a guy that I met through Untapped. We circle back around to Untapped. I remember making some friends through Untapped that just like any other social media, you make friends, but I know early on I got a lot of crap from Joe, and Joe was like, you don't even know this person, you went to Idaho and met this guy Jacob, and you're like, you could have been put in the back of a car and drugged somewhere. I was like, dude, there are people that are online dating and marrying, and I'm like, how is that any more dangerous than, potentially than that? So I made some really good friends through Untapped, and the more friends that I made, and then I introduced him to some people he's now become friends with. He's like, oh yeah, that's not so bad. I guess you can make friends that way. But Brian's one of those guys I met through an Untapped event. Came through DC and met him, and we've stayed in touch and send each other beer packages and to keep ourselves sane through this COVID time. So it's a lot of friends like that of supporting and people, again, like yourself that are saying, hey, I'm willing to share. Hey, let me tell my relatives about it, my friends about it. People that might not be interested, but will give it a try. And that's meant a lot. That's been a ton. Obviously, Mike Fell's support with the technical side of things with the media center. Those have been pretty big. And then as some of the times when it gets close and I'm like, how am I going to pull this episode off? Everybody's backed out. I don't, especially during COVID, so you can't show up somewhere and maybe ring in some business in person. There have been a few times when I was like, I just don't know if it's going to happen. And that past life of coaching for 25 years and that competitive spirit kicks in and we're like, no, you will do this. You will succeed. You will put out another episode. You will keep going. And that drives you in the head and you're like, all right, man, I'm not going to let this thing beat me, whatever it is. That competitive thing kicks in and you're like, I'm going to put out an episode. And some of those have been probably some of the better episodes in the long run. I don't know whether it was the time crunch or the pressure of the situation or the motivational drive, but some of those have been some pretty good episodes.
We always talk about rising to the level of the occasion, right? And that's if it's a commitment within yourself, which clearly it is, it's something that you have some talent for, it's something that you are willing to work hard for, and I think you can see the worked product because of those kind of things. So not giving up, I think, was the right call, man.
I
I
appreciate that.
appreciate as a listener you doing that, and as a viewer, right?
Thanks.
You've kind of been, I won't say a champion of a cause because I don't think you've ever really pushed any one agenda other than sharing a pint with friends and some new people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you've done a few different episodes now where you've helped tease some beer releases, some collaborations, upcoming events. But one of the bigger ones I've noticed is that you talk about the folks that are doing things for a bigger cause.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of let us know a little bit more about why you picked what you did and how those type of events come around for you?
Yeah. Some of it is, as I'm doing research, I'm finding out about things that people have done. When I talk with Matt and Chad at Breweries in PA, I was like, look, I know you guys do a super comprehensive website. You write stories, you visit and talk about new openings and brewery closures. You have maps that break down, where it's kid friendly, dog friendly, who has food. I mean, like anything you could think of. I mean, if you want to know anything about breweries in Pennsylvania of any kind of Pennsylvania beer, you go to Breweries in PA and Matt and Chad have you covered. And as I was looking at that, one of the things I realized was that they have done a number of collaborative causes. They've done some things for veterans. When we talked to them, they had just come off of one that they had done that obviously that they couldn't release because of everything with the pandemic, and they're trying to figure out how to work around that. But the previous year, they'd raised close to $10,000 for working with veteran breweries and putting out a beer. That's really cool. People need to know that. You're not just a couple of guys running a website, but you're doing something like this and you're trying to give back. You're doing giveaways where you're engaging your fans through your social media and giving away $100 gift card to this brewery or $50 to that one, and things like that. So I really looked at that and I was like, this is, again, it's a great story people might not think of and they should know about. So we've had episodes like that, and then we've had episodes where the causes are pretty clear. When I spoke with Marcus Baskerville at Weather Souls, it was specifically because of the Black is Beautiful beer and the movement and trying to raise funds and awareness for the inequities and the problems that minorities face, not just in the craft beer industry, but here across the world. It was fresh off of everything that happened with George Floyd's murder. And I was like, you know what? This is a really, really important cause. It became something, as he talks about in the episode, that was just going to be a release for them locally there in San Antonio, to something that, became a worldwide collaboration with over 1,100 breweries in 23 countries saying, we're going to brew this beer and we're going to give money to our local organizations that help with police reform and legal fees for people who have been wrongly accused, and raise awareness and talk about more inclusion and increase diversity. I had met Marcus when I was down in Texas, down in Laredo, take that 2.5-hour drive straight up and try to get some craft beer. And they had opened just recently after I had moved down that way for coaching. And so he and I knew each other. I didn't know if he would remember me, but I reached out to him and he was very gracious with his time. It literally, the day we shot that, I mean, if you pay attention in the background, there's a lot of back traffic because they had a big press event because they were about to release their 3 variants of it and kick everything off. And it was that day, it was media day, that he sat down with me for 30, 40 minutes to talk about his background and what his experiences were as a minority in the craft beer industry, who has been his influences, what moved him to do something like this that became so huge. I just felt like it was really important because, as you and I know, that's a topic that's important to me to begin with how I was born and raised. My dad taught in English in inner city Baltimore for pretty much all of his life. And I grew up literally not really knowing race, creed, color. Like it wasn't a thing for me. And I looked at everything that was happening, especially after George Floyd, and said, I don't want to be perceived as that ignorant white person who's not doing anything just because you don't see color. That there's a problem, but don't be the white person who's not being told you should do something. And I'm like, well, what can I do? What is my platform? And I said, my platform is my podcast, and let's put Marcus on if he's willing, which he, like I said, again, he was, and I was grateful for that, to share what I thought was a great story and help awareness, and was really well received by my audience, which I appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, hearing that episode, because that was one of the ones you called me and said, hey, because as you know, I get a little behind on the podcast occasionally. I don't catch all at the same time, and then I binge listen.
Yeah.
But one of the things you told me was, "Hey, you really need to hear this one. This is one that I'm proud to be releasing. It's one I'm proud to be a part of. It's a story that I really would like to see continue to be told."
Mm-hmm.
And hearing that episode, particularly with the poignancy of the timing of the episode and when it came out. I mean, it was an immediate reaction to current events, right?
Right.
It was live, it was real. So I was really happy to see that you were able to tell, and Marcus was able to tell that story, because it was just, it was what's going on inside the country, right?
Yeah.
And for people who have their heads in the sand or aren't aware of things, all right, well, not everybody gets all the news, and whatever news they get is whatever slant, but hearing it from a guy who makes beer and has a different perspective because, hey, it affects him. He happens to be Black as well, right? Like hearing it from a different perspective and hearing it from a, I don't know, in my opinion, non-politically charged. There was nothing about his presentation of that made any antenna raise that you had to, like, oh, I got to tune that out, right? Like you just listen to him talk about, hey, this has been my experience. This is what happens here. And oh, by the way, this is something that's important to me and I want to do this. And hey, guess what? It's important to a lot of other people too, because now we've got 11,000 breweries doing this. And how cool was that movement organically? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So, all right, let's shift gears a little bit here. You've got 1 year under your belt as a podcaster.
Right.
You've done it 7 times. You're there, right? So what are the future plans for Share a Pint? What can people expect in season 2?
We're going to look for season 2 in 2021. And this is a chance for, as you know, again, from coaching, go back and reflect and say, okay, the season's over. What do you do at the end of a coaching season? No, never not played golf and take the next 9 months off. We actually keep working. But look at it and say, okay, where can I improve? What did I do well? What did I do not so well? Blah, blah, blah. So I've been trying to get a lot of feedback from various people yourself, all my friends, people that are longtime listeners, and what Mike Fell's saying at the media center and what he sees, and just get as much information as possible to say, what do we do to improve? Where do we go from here? We're going to be doing polls through our social media account. I mean, we're not disappearing. We're not going anywhere. But during the break between season 1 and season 2, asking people for all kinds of input and say, do you like a bi-weekly format? Is that too much? Would you like it to see maybe monthly? Do you like the release format of Friday mornings so that you have it, for your weekend when you're able to go out and drink beer or whatever? Or with everything that's going on, would you prefer a different time frame? Does it get lost in the weekend by being, Friday morning? Things like that to try to figure out what we can do. We'll evaluate, because again, like I said, coaching, we'll evaluate every single piece of it. We'll look at are we going to have different music for the episode? I thought about that. I'm a music guy, and then I started listening to our theme, and I was like, I don't know, man, I really like that. So we're not sure, but we're going to take input on everything, and as well as hearing feedback from people about other places that they'd like to hear us cover. The nice thing about doing things remote is that you can basically talk to any brewery in the world. The challenge of doing it remotely is, the standard technical stuff of internet hangs and glitches with video and audio. And for me, the big thing is the B-roll. I can't shoot the B-roll that I need. So some people's social media sites are amazing, and I can pull what I need off of. They start talking about stuff, I can pull it off of that and not have a problem. Sometimes I've got to ask them, hey, can you shoot this on your phone? Or a couple places I've been able to, like Distillery Lane Ciderworks and 1623, be able to go out in a safe, socially distant manner, shoot the footage that I would like myself. So that's been a challenge. Obviously, we want to hope to get through the pandemic and be able to go back to shooting in the breweries. I think there's a lot to be said for shooting in the brewery. We'll talk about the way it's consumed, audio version versus video version. Is there a preference, one or the other? One of the things I didn't really talk about was that the video versions really stemmed from kind of the loan requirement of being a member at the Community Media Center. You pay your $40 membership fee, you have access to all of this equipment and all these experts, and then it's also, you're producing content that's still your own, but they're able to show it on their local cable channels. And so they were really, really good. Mike was great about, I was only worried about the audio. Coming in, I'm thinking straight podcast. Mostly people hear podcast, they think just audio. That's what I was thinking. That's what I was focusing on. We were probably 6 episodes in before I had given them a video version. And they could have been like, hey, using all our equipment, you kind of owe us this, we're cutting you off. You can't go out and shoot anything. And they didn't. They were very understanding. And as I started to get into doing the video episodes, I actually kind of did a 180 and really liked them more because I feel like it's more engaging. It really helps visually draw people in. And sometimes there are things you just can't articulate well enough through audio that you just need to see it. And sometimes it's just stuff you really want to see, like, the beautiful farm breweries and seeing the horses on the equestrian farm there at Wadaka, where Keith was, some of my B-roll shots from stuff like that I'm like, wow, I'm really proud of that amazing horse shot. Is that I just caught the horse just right coming into the stable and all. And, all the people at the media center geeked out and they're like, that's a great shot, but you don't watch the episode, you listen to it, you never know. Or just like you said, seeing what a brewery's like, seeing the surroundings and all and go, wow, that is a really beautiful place. I would love to go drink beer there. So we're going to evaluate all of it and see what we can tweak and do to try to make it better. That's what I'm thinking for season 2.
Sounds great, man. Like I love the way that you're treating this like you did your past life, right? You're analyzing the footage, literally. You are going through the stats, you're going through it all, you're asking questions, you're doing polls, you're getting feedback, and the whole goal is to make it better, right? That's the goal. And I think you're doing a great job of that. So are there any particular stories that you know of right now that you think you want to try and tell in the next year?
Well, I've still got a pretty good list. That was one of the interesting things, that once I started to go remote, I wasn't that I didn't have a list of people, but there were some people that I was like, I just want to shoot this in their brewery. And I think I'd do the show more justice if I can shoot it in the brewery and visually show. There are places we could have done, Crooked Crab, Full Tilt. They've been great about, yeah, we'd love to be on the show. We'll do it. I want to shoot it in the brewery there. A great example is Ministry of Brewing. They opened down here not long ago, Baltimore City, and they're in a very historic Gothic style church. And everything they went through to be able to open this brewery in what used to be a church, and how undisturbed it is, and how much of the features of the church that are still in place, how big the place is. It's amazing. It's beautiful. I was there when they opened. That's a place that I'm like, you just don't do that episode until you can shoot in that site. So yeah, there's things like that. I really want to be able to find other people connected to, the craft beer industry or other industries. Like I was really happy to have Tim on from Distillery Lane Ciderworks, and then have Yancy on last episode from Clear Skies Meadery, because I wanted to give that for our viewers. What do you know about cider? What do you know about meat? What do you think you know about them? Let me have these experts tell you about them. Let's learn about them. So I wanted to have those types of things in there. So same type of thing. I want to look at artists who work with, the label art, can art, bottle art, what kind of stories do they have? I feel like there's a lot of other stories out there. There's a great craft beer historian who knows all beer for Maryland, Maureen O'Prey. And she's published several books, and she's had a public access television show. They've done a couple of beer specials where she's been a part of it because she's a beer historian. She knows so much. I want to talk with her. I mean, I know she's going to have great stories. I mean, she's good friends with Rob and Judy at Checkerspot, and they've done a couple of beers that she helped research. They were actually old historic recipes, and she helped them research and understand how to turn around and, make it modern enough from the techniques, but try to stay true to the recipe. And they brewed a few beers like that, like the Modern Fitzgerald, a brown ale. And there's some great stories there that are maybe a little outside the box of, the brewer and the breweries. So those are some things I'm thinking about.
Love it, man. Love it. I can't wait to hear more. Again, the shackles are off. Maybe those of us that are not living in the Maryland area can have a brewery highlighted. Maybe you can have some people send you some messages on social media and say, hey, Jerry, do one about blah, blah, blah. I'll shoot your B-roll, or, get some of those extra helper monkeys out there, right? Like,
there you go. Now you're on film. We're gonna. If we do anything in Alaska, you're bundle up and film some stuff, man.
Hey, we have a lot of breweries here, actually. Downtown Anchorage actually has quite a few. I can't wait to take the tour. And back when I can safely hop in a vehicle with people outside my family and go into places with people outside my family, right? And go do that. So I'm definitely looking forward to exploring what's up here. There's been some good ones.
Well, Rob, this was fun.
Absolutely. I've had a blast, man. It's been great catching up and doing this. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you for coming up with this idea. And I hope that our audience enjoyed it as much as we did.
I hope so too, man. It's been seriously a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm just glad that we were able to celebrate the first season of Share a Pint with you.
You got it, my friend.
Prost.
Prost.
Share a Pint is released bi-weekly on Friday mornings and can be found at shareapintpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at share_pint. Show notes for this episode are available at shareapintpodcast.com. Music for the show, Groundwork, provided by Kevin MacLeod and can be found online at incompetech.com. Share a Pint is made possible by help from the Community Media Center of Carroll County. Associated with the craft beer industry and have an interesting story you'd like to share on a future episode? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at shareapintpodcast.com or email us at jerry@shareapintpodcast.com. Until the next time we share a pint, I'm Jerry Hulla. Prost.